When was the last time you heard a great story, and did it have any impact in your purchasing decisions? Well, if you answered yes to the latter question, you're not alone, according to my friends at the University of West Alabama. Storytelling has become one of the more powerful tools in modern marketing, with 74 to 92% of organizations now using it to sell products and build brand connection. Furthermore, more than 74% of B2B marketers and 73% of regular marketers are using storytelling in marketing, and 92% of consumers believe that brand advertising and communication ought to be delivered through narratives. And this week I'm joined by someone who knows all about the power and persistence of storytelling and how it helps marketers, entrepreneurs, and organizations increase the vitality of their bottom line. This week, I'm joined by my friend, Hartjen. He's a writer, musician, and full-stack marketer based in Mission Viejo, California. Across his professional career, which has spanned more than 5 decades, he's reinvented himself multiple times, moving across multiple industries, including investment banking, pharmaceuticals, SaaS software, and consumer electronics. Through every chapter of his journey, one constant still remains: the prevalence of storytelling. He's been quoted by the national media on subjects such as consumer electronics, retail, and he's also been a contributor to multiple online outlets, including his own, Hartjen.com. He has written on everything from sports, particularly football, the NFL, hockey, auto racing, to business topics such as sales and marketing. He's also published 5 books, including Immaculate, How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh, Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma, the Indy 500, a year-long quest to win the greatest sports spectacular in racing, Revenue Orchestration, today's new era of B2B sales and marketing, and Outflanked, an espionage thriller. In March of 2019, Ray was also diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a battle he continues to fight today with resilience and determination. And when he's not writing or helping organizations tell their most compelling of stories, he's making music as part of his 2-piece acoustic band entitled The Chronic Padres. He joined me this week to talk about the power of storytelling, the lessons he's learned from a life of reinvention, and how creativity, resilience, and human connection continue to shape both his personal and professional journey. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Ray, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn about how your nearly 5-decade career has inspired a meaningful and organizational change, my friend. It's great to see you, and happy Monday to you.
Yeah, happy Monday to you, Kevin. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity I'm ready to dive in. You sent me a bunch of questions ahead of time, and you put some thought into it. And I love speaking with a host who's really prepared.
Absolutely, my friend. So, right, my first question for you, because I know that your career has spanned over 5 decades, and I believe that you are someone who thinks that the power of storytelling, and as an old journalist, my friend, I'm always interested to tell compelling stories, but you believe that stories can help us tell better and more competitive business stories, my friend. So tell me why you think the power of storytelling can be a true business advantage. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, that's a good question, Kevin. And, I'm a big fan of storytelling simply because that's what people want to consume. There is so much noise in the world, so much information and data and the like. But what really engages a reader, a listener, or a viewer is a story. And it's something I think that is inherent with us as people. As children, we don't know much, but the way we want to learn, the way we want to be entertained, is by having people tell us a story or read us a story, show us a story, or what have you. Right? It's storytelling. We beg our parents, tell me a story. We have our friends, hey, tell me a story. Storytelling is a way to convey information, educate, raise awareness, inform, entertain, but it's a way that it's been proven. People want to engage with stories. So, when I'm working with marketing or organizations and they want to market and they want to connect with folks, really what they want to do is engage. There's a tendency, I think, for people to look at some vanity metrics, is what we call it in business. That's the number of followers you have, number of impressions you might get, or what have you. But what you really are looking for is engagement. You want to reach through the noise, grab somebody's attention, and keep their attention. How long do they stay on a web page? Do they comment on a social media post, like and share, retweet, and things like that? Those are all engagement metrics, and those are, as a brand, you can think back and say we've done something here. We've captured someone's attention in a way that, in a long enough way, and in a way that is so positive that they in turn feel that they want to spend more time with us. And that's ultimately what we want to do is, share those stories, and it takes time to do that. So storytelling is a great way for someone to build a brand. It's also a great way to educate, inform, raise awareness, entertain, really kind of put it all in one bucket.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Ray, I also want to talk to you about reinvention because throughout the course of your career, you've served many industries, including investment banking, pharmaceuticals, consumer electronics. You've also been in SaaS software and athletics, my friend. So I'm curious about how you believe the power of reinvention can reinvigorate you as a career professional in business or any profession for that matter. And talk to me about of the process of reinvention and how exciting it is to always professionally challenge yourself. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, for me, it wasn't so much as I reinvented myself. I've had a lot of pivots in my career with different industries, but Kevin, about 20 years ago, or maybe even a little less than that, maybe 15 years ago, I realized that despite having a lot of pivots in my career, I was really kind of doing the same sort of thing. I was storytelling. In investment banking, we're telling stories about different securities to invest in. When I'm working in organizational development, I'm telling, I'm using stories to, say where the company is and where the company or the organization wants to be and how to get from where they are to where they want to be. And I was, in marketing roles, it's telling stories about products, services, solutions, experiences. And when I was in the public relations roles, it was telling stories to other people, to media people, to tell the stories that I wanted them to tell. I had all these pivots, but for me, it was really kind of falling back to the same skill set, the critical thinking, decision making, influencing others, interpersonal communication, and those types of skills. I think it's important for folks to not be afraid of reinventing themselves, but I think they need to reinvent themselves, challenge themselves in a way that's consistent with their core values. So I think it starts with core values, Kevin. What are the values that you have as a person? What are these strongly held beliefs? Because when you start acting in contra to your values, that creates stress and internal conflict. And an example I like to give, and maybe a cliched example, is somebody who says, the most important thing for me, the value for me is family. I want to be present for my family. Yet at the same time, they have obligations. They have to provide for their family. Maybe that's a job that takes them away from their family. They have to travel a lot, work long hours and the like. And that creates a stress. That creates a conflict. I want to be present for my family. Yet at the same time, I need to work this job that takes me away from my family. There's a conflict there. So when folks are looking out to maybe reinvent themselves, one thing that they need to be aware of is clarify in their head, articulate to themselves what are their core values, and then from there be able to find a purpose. What's my purpose based on my core values? What's going to give me a life of joy, fulfillment, a sense of satisfaction, a peace of mind. Because Kevin, we all deserve that, and so for you folks out there in the audience, if you're struggling to find joy in your life, you're struggling to find a sense of satisfaction, self-fulfillment, a peace of joy, peace of mind, if those are things that you're struggling to find, that you find absent, take a look at challenging yourself to make a pivot, reinvent yourself, so you can achieve those things that you deserve, those things that you want.
Absolutely. And, Ray, I know that you've been quoted by national media outlets about the power of storytelling throughout a variety of industries, as I mentioned before. But you and I both know that creating stories that have value require you to build up a trust of authority on those issues. So I'm curious to ask you about creating value and building credibility. So that the knowledge that you're hoping people learn has sort of a value or proposition behind it that people trust. So talk to me about creating value and building trust as a storyteller, and what goes into that, my friend?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, trust is something that, you accumulate a drop at a time, and you can erode trust a bucket at a time, right? And some people are, inherently more trusting than others. On a scale of 1 to 10, I can view myself as like a 7. I'll give a stranger a 7 on the trust scale. But then they have to prove it to me, right? Keep having small victories and prove that you're an 8, a 9, or a 10 as far as my trust in you. When it comes to me as a writer, as a content creator, trust stems from authenticity and honesty. You have to be honest, and you have to be authentic. You have to act with a degree of integrity, and you have to keep proving yourself. Right? That integrity aspect is, what do you do when no one's looking, when no one's watching, when no one's listening, when no one's reading? That's the integrity in you. So when people are reading, watching, listening, act consistent with that. For me, honesty is a big part of it, and I want to earn my readers' trust. My second book I wrote, Kevin, is a memoir of me as a cancer patient. And in 2019, I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And that, for you out there in the audience who aren't familiar with it, it's blood cancer. It's incurable blood cancer, but treatable blood cancer. So I started treatment upon my diagnosis in March of 2019, over 7 years ago. I learned so much in the initial parts of my journey, Kevin, and I'm continuing to learn so much, not just about my condition. I've learned way more about myself as a person, and I've had people help me do that. And one of the things, some of the people that helped me almost right away upon my diagnosis were other patients and caregivers that were in a cancer support group. And meeting with those people, in my time of need, they pulled me forward. and to where I wanted to be, to where I needed to be, mentally and emotionally. That made a huge impression on me. And I was like, wow, I want to be like them. I want to be a resource. When I'm feeling good, when I'm feeling strong, if I feel as though I have something to offer, if I have some value to offer, I want to be able to do that. If somebody's following me and they need some help and I can provide help, I want to be there to help. So that led me to write my second book, a memoir called Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma. And, to be a value added resource, Kevin, to the cancer patient community, to the caregiver community, to the ally community, I had to be honest, man. I had to take a hard look at myself as who I am as a person, my physical being, my mental, emotional, and spiritual beings as well. And then I had to tell my story of fighting cancer, of going through chemotherapy, of having a stem cell transplant. So, adding value requires trust. Building trust, it takes a time, it's a process, but it comes from being honest, being authentic, and acting with a degree of integrity, a high degree of integrity. So, it's like I said, that trust aspect is something that you build drop at a time, but you can erode it very quickly, dump the bucket over, and have to start all over again. And maybe you'll never be able to rebuild that level of trust. But it's a great question for those of you out there, looking how to add value. It starts with yourself. Build that trust by being your authentic you, your honest you.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, you're the author of 5 books and counting, my friend. And I know they cover a variety or a diverse group of topics from sports to business to cancer, as you mentioned. So I'm curious, through the written word, what powerful message do you hope to deliver through your audience, whether you're writing books or blogs or articles for your own website? I'm curious, what sort of empowerment does the written word provide you to continue to develop content and write stories that leave an impact, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I've always valued reading, and I can thank my parents for that. My parents were avid readers. My parents had books all the time. My father has a giant library in his Leavenworth, Kansas home, over 20,000 volumes. So we were always exposed, my sister and I, as youngsters, reading. And I love to read, and I've gained so much from reading. For me as a writer, I want to be able to connect. I have different goals with different audiences, and there's different audiences for my books, as you mentioned, right? The one thing I want to do is add value, and whether it's entertaining, which I think some of the sports books might be. There's also an educational and informational component in there as well. The business book I wrote, certainly, it's about educating and informing. So, depending on the audience, depending on the topic, there's different goals. But ultimately it comes down to engagement. I want to be able to, first of all, break through the noise and let people know that the book exists. So part of that is, the title of the book, and a big part of it is the description and the meta description of it. So, will it pop up on Amazon, when people are searching for a topic or what have you? The writing, it doesn't end with the manuscript. A very important component of it is the descriptions, and where they go, the back cover description and the like. When I come up with a book idea, an early part of it is, what's the audience for this? Am I writing it for myself? Because that's okay too. There are things that I have written for myself, and if other people can gain value from it, awesome. But the exercise was for me. But identify the target audience. What's the way that, again, going back to our very first point of discussion here, engagement. Let's go and engage with them, and then approach it in a truthful, authentic, honest manner.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ray, as you mentioned, you were diagnosed with multiple myeloma in 2019, and you've embraced that identity as a cancer fighter, while also continuing to write, speak, and perform music as a part of your acoustic duo known as the Chronic Padres, my friend. So I'm curious, how have these experiences reshaped your outlook on, your professional journey, life, resilience, creativity, and living each day with incredible intention. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, my diagnosis, like I said, multiple myeloma is an incurable blood cancer. And I was on a podcast, over a year ago, a host named Helena Strauss, who also has multiple myeloma. And she asked me, she said, hey, Ray, would you change your diagnosis? And I'm like, wow, what a great question. And here I am live on the spot, and I had to think of, what I want to change how do I even answer that question? And I can tell you, Kevin, I don't want to have blood cancer. But my gut told me at that time, and my gut still tells me now, I would not change my diagnosis because I have grown so much as an individual since my, diagnosis 7 years ago. One of the first things I did, well, actually, the first thing I did when I was diagnosed was I'm going to be the best cancer patient ever. My doctor told me, Ray, you're going to have an induction therapy of chemotherapy and immunotherapy for 3 to 6 months, and then probably have a stem cell transplant. I'm like, 3 to 6 months, I'm going to do it in 3 months. I'm going to be in the best physical shape ever. And I started working out even harder. I started cleaning up my diet even more. And, Kevin, about 11 days into my fight against cancer, I was absolutely wiped out, just exhausted. Went out to dinner with my wife, Lori, and our son, Raymond, and I couldn't even read the menu. And right there, I was able to articulate to myself. I probably knew it beforehand, but I maybe even thought about it. But I really recognized that I was physically exhausted because I had neglected too much of my entire being. My being is more than just my physical being. It's my mental being, my emotional being, my spiritual being as well. And, neglecting those aspects of it, because I was just focused on my physical being, I was wiped out. Those weaknesses in those other areas of my being kind of dragged down, my physical being. And so I took it took a day, maybe two, to realize that and recognize that. And I'm like, wow, I just learned something about myself. What else can I learn about myself? And I found myself going back to this thing called a timeline exercise. And it's an exercise that I facilitated many times in my corporate career when I was facilitating a time management course. And what I'd like to share with you, Kevin, in the audience right now, audience members, if you have a pencil and a piece of paper, that's great. If you don't need one, because it's a really simple exercise. On that piece of paper or in your mind, just draw a horizontal line from left to right. And on the far left-hand side, make a little vertical tick mark. And the far right-hand side, make another vertical tick mark. So what you have is a line segment there. On the left-hand side, under that tick mark, write the letter B. That represents your birth. And you're probably ahead of me, audience members. On the right-hand side, write the letter D. That represents your death. And so that's the timeline of your life on this planet. So the exercise part of it, the introspective part, the contemplative part, is like, where do you believe in your heart? Where do you think you are on your timeline? And I know intellectually we know that tomorrow's not promised, not even the rest of today is promised. But, where do you believe you are? And Kevin, when I facilitated this for other folks, I would just kind of haphazardly, without thinking that hard on it, just put my tick mark right in the middle. And I did that because, man, I was going to live forever. And if I wasn't going to live forever, I was going to live to at least be 100. So go to 2019, March of 2019. I'm 54 years old at the time, and I get diagnosed with an incurable blood cancer. So when I looked at that timeline exercise a few weeks later, I said, hey, man, if I'm being intellectually honest with myself, I'm a lot further to the right than I was when I just haphazardly would throw it in the middle, right? So now I looked at my timeline, and for you out there in the audience, take a look at your timeline and just ask yourself, what does that mean to you? And I'll tell you what it meant to me when I looked at it in 2019. I looked at it and I said, wow, I think that I have for far too often taken time for granted. Okay, that doesn't make me that much different than a lot of other humans. And so I thought, well, what else? What does that mean? What does taking time for granted? How has that manifested itself in my life, Kevin? And I right away, I came to the realization, taking time for granted, because I took time for granted, I took people for granted and relationships for granted. So right there, awakening for me. What do I want to do with the rest of my timeline, and who do I want to do it with? That was a big pivot moment for me, right? Yeah, sure, I have cancer, but that's not the end. That's a new beginning for me. Right there, making that realization that I take time for granted, and because of that, I take people in relationships for granted. It reframed what I wanted to do with my life. What do I what do I want to do? That's the what, and who do I want to do it with? And from that point, I've pivoted. Since 2022, I've published 6 books. I have manuscripts for number 7 and number 8 in the works. That they'll be out later this year. My purpose, my core values. Does that make sense, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. And Ray, there's a sign in my office that says resilience is the test once is the answer to the test once adversity strikes. And I know that living with blood cancer and throughout the course of your career, you've had to sort of reinvent the meaning of resilience. So I'm curious, when you think about the concept of resilience and growth mindset, how do you think those concepts have been reinvented or redefined over the course of time? And how do those concepts resonate with you, my friend? I'm curious to get your answer there.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody knows a thing or two about resilience and standing up to challenges and obstacles, Kevin, it's you, right? One of the things I like to share with folks, particularly newly diagnosed cancer patients, the honor of my life, in addition to, being married to my wife for over 30 years, raising 2 wonderful children, Olivia, Raymond, it's been engaging with cancer patients, their caregivers, and their allies through my book, Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma. Because of that book, I've engaged with patients from New Zealand, Australia, Egypt, Turkey, Iran, all through Western Europe, the United Kingdom, Canada, the United States. It's been awesome doing that. And, getting a chance to hear the stories and understand the challenges that patients and caregivers are going through. One thing I like to share with them is that, you as an individual are stronger than you know. And that's something I like to share with the audience out there. There will be obstacles. There will be challenges that come up in their life. Living can be tough, right? And there will be those challenges. But I am absolutely convinced that almost every individual out there is stronger than they know. They just haven't been tested yet. And when the test does come, you can rise up to that test. Don't let the test define you. It's part of your identity, but it's not the entire you. There is so much more to you out there. You are stronger than you know. That's one thing I love to tell folks, particularly when it comes to resilience. Second thing I like to tell folks is that you're not alone. There is a community out there. I can tell you the multiple myeloma community is a very strong, supportive, compassionate, empathetic, considerate community, right? When you need help, don't think that you're alone. There are others out there like you. And when you need help, please seek help. And on the other side, if you're capable of providing help and someone is asking you for help, reach out and extend a hand to them and pull them forward where they need to be. Hey, you are stronger than you know. Together, we are even stronger still. Kevin, as you know, we all get something, right? We're all in this together. How do we make each other stronger? How do we face these challenges? Sometimes we can go right over the challenge. Other times you have to kind of go around the challenge. But you're stronger than you know. And you, my friend, are an example of that.
Well, I certainly do appreciate that. And, I know that you help organizations today communicate their most compelling stories. So I'm curious, when you're working with organizations, how do you advise them between a compelling story that really moves the needle of progress forward versus a story that just checks a box to communicate a generic message? So how do you help people and organizations uncover the stories that really drive organizational change. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, I have like several parallel careers right now, right? I'm a writer, I'm a musician, I'm also a freelance marketer. I love helping organizations tell their stories, right? There's always what's kind of great about marketing is that it's part art, part science. There's that creative aspect of it, and there's people that specialize in the creative aspect of it. Advertising folks. So you have those that art, but there's also this great science behind marketing as well. Tons of data about what's working, what's not working, and adjustments you need to make. I like working with organizations to, first of all, understand their goals, and then create marketing plans that help achieve their goals. And working with both, what are all the different levers that we can push and pull upon to positively affect the results that we're trying to achieve. Sometimes it's just building brand identity. Other times it's very specifically trying to get a conversion into a simple act. What do we want this person to do? We want them to buy. How do we tell the story that encourages someone to buy? So it's not always buying. Sometimes it's raising awareness. Sometimes it's informing. It's educating, or what have you. But eventually, when it comes to marketing, it's just facilitating the customer journey, right? So the aspect of it is making sure you're taking actions to have your customers or your prospective customers take the actions that you want them to take, and then you have to measure what you want to achieve. Because when you start measuring what you want to achieve, then you're kind of focused on continual improvement processes, using all that data on how customers, both existing and prospective customers, interact with your brand. Again, it gives us, from a strategic and a tactical component, what are those levers that you can push and pull upon to affect results. Does that answer your question, Kev?
Yeah, absolutely. And whether you're writing a book or helping businesses with their content or performing music, as you've mentioned, your work is always rooted in entertaining and education. So I'm curious to ask you about how you balance those two things between education and entertainment in order to move the needle of progress forward and really provide an authentic voice and business and all of the other things that you're involved in. What are your thoughts there, man?
Yeah, when I think about education, information and entertainment, I use the term edutainment. So how can you educate in an entertaining way? And that entertainment aspect, goes back to our earlier discussion around engagement. A very difficult thing to do is to capture someone's attention in this world today. There are so many data sources out there. If you can get them to listen for a moment, watch for a moment, read for a moment, that's a tremendous accomplishment. But how do you keep them there? If you look at if you're involved with website analytics, there's this golden triangle, right? And it's from left to right, kind of a triangular shaped wedge. That's where the eye falls. They read the first line and maybe the beginning of the second line or so forth, and then a lot of times they just leave. So how do you educate, how do you inform in a way that's entertaining enough to have people stick around? Right. So some of the ways I communicate, if I'm communicating through a song or something like that, that has to be 100% entertainment. If it's telling the story about the Indianapolis 500, which is my fourth book, the Indy 500, A Year-Long Quest to Win the Greatest Spectacle in Racing. I'm educating, I'm informing, I'm telling a story, but it has to be done in an entertaining way, that people want to read the next page. So that's maybe a 50-50 split between education and entertainment. So again, I think it depends on what the target is, how you do it. I think it requires a little bit of both in all instances. Maybe in some instances it leans further to one or the other. I also think it's an interesting challenge, Kevin, today in the age of artificial intelligence. Right? So many people are creating content, whether it's for individual brands or for corporate brands, organizational brands. So many people are creating content using AI tools, but it's disjointed content. As people on the team, create different pieces of content, assets, collateral, using different AI tools at different, with different queries and the like, they're losing a little bit of that tone and that voice and that personality, right? And they're not so much losing it so much as they're having a lot of different personalities in the way that they go to market, right? A brand. So, care has to be taken as you're generating this, AI generated content to, edit it strongly. What is our organizational voice? Are we are we informal? Are we flippant? Are we humorous? You need to build those in and make sure that the messages that you're sending out to your target audiences are consistent and they're reflective of the brand that you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ray, I know that you and I both know about the power of building community, and you will say that one of the greatest gifts throughout your cancer journey has really been building a sense of community. It's one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast 6.5 years ago, to build a sense of community, because I believe that there's much more that binds us together than tears us apart. So I'm curious to ask you, how has forming relationships throughout your cancer journey really helped you to rethink the importance of authentic and truly genuine relationships? What are your thoughts on the importance of relationship building and the connection between social connection? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, relationships I think are so important. I mean, it's kind of like the why to do a bunch of the whats, and interacting with people. I have, I'm trying, Kevin, to live more and more in gratitude, and in living in that present. A big part of that is the people and the relationships. It's meeting people like you through different tools and community. It's the community is kind of like what makes it worthwhile, right? It's for me as a creator of content, whether it's assets for an organization, books for myself, songs for me and my partner, or what have you. I mean, it requires others. There's an intrinsic value of creating something, but there's an extrinsic value of sharing it with others and collecting their feedback. And ideally, they like it, but hopefully they just even react to it. For me, having these relationships, I built a lot more. I value relationships more after my diagnosis. I always liked them before, but I didn't really put the value on them as much as I do now, because I know that time is limited, and these people are important to me, and they're important to me for a reason. So let's increase my ability to do stuff with them and to get enjoyment from them. With being online as an author, and particularly as an author of a cancer book that's a memoir that's intended to be a resource for folks, it's such an honor, Kevin, when people reach out to me through social channels asking me questions. I've had people admit that they were just too uncomfortable and too afraid to speak to their spouses and their children about their multiple myeloma diagnosis. Yet they found comfort and safety and trust in me, a complete stranger, online. And I'm like, man, well, that's special, and I want to hear a patient's story, because if there's any way that I can help, I'm feeling good right now. I'm feeling strong. I'm feeling powerful. I feel as though I have something to contribute. I want to be able to add value to someone else's life, and it all comes about with those relationships. So I really like to encourage people to be open, to seek out communities, particularly when you're in need of a community, and participate in that community both ways. When you need help, ask for help. If you can supply help, offer it and provide it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ray, we've talked a lot about the power of storytelling, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on creating a roadmap for entrepreneurs, because all entrepreneurs aren't great storytellers, and one of the things they struggle with is marketing and clearly communicating their offer and sort of their areas of expertise. So how do you think becoming a better storyteller can help entrepreneurs become better salespeople and connect more authentically with an audience? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I love working with entrepreneurs and small organizations because when I do, there's a recognition that you can't do it all, or maybe you don't have the skills, the talents, the expertise, or the interest, or the time to do it. When you're an entrepreneur, it's all about growth. Trying to grow your business. And sometimes it's very difficult to service your business while at the same time grow the business. I call that stuffing the tube. You need to have prospects coming into the other end of the tube, right? Again, how do you break through the noise to let people know your value proposition? Whether it's a product, a service, experience, a solution, or what have you, you have to be able to communicate that. And I think the best way, I think it's been proven repeatedly, the best way of doing that is through storytelling. So, what are the different tools and the channels that you have? And there's tons of digital channels, a website, for example, but there's also great analog channels as well, and that is direct mail. Direct mail works really well to spread messages. I mean, that's why you get junk mail, is because it works, and people are utilizing it because it converts, it raises awareness. So if you're an entrepreneur out there, a big part of your business is always going to be telling your story to prospective customers so that they can become customers. And your story is your value proposition. And one thing I'd really like to encourage, entrepreneurs and small businesses to consider is the power of a book. It doesn't have to be a big book, but I can tell you this: if you have a pitch deck, you might have a book in your hand. There are people out there that specialize. Mike Capuzzi is one of them. He specializes in what's called a shook, a short, helpful book of 100 pages or less that communicates your value proposition. Mike calls it being 5 mile famous, and gives an example of a dentist who writes a little book about the disadvantages of having metal fillings and how you can go about getting those replaced. Create a little book, pass it out to the community, educate the community, and the community, when people want to seek a solution to maybe a problem they have, they go to his business, his dentist practice, because of the book. So you entrepreneurs out there in small businesses, if you have a pitch deck, if you have a talk track for like a 1-hour introductory meeting, you might have enough content to create a short book, a good old-fashioned analog way to create authority and expertise on a subject, to communicate authority and expertise on a subject to others.
Yeah, Ray, I want to talk to you about the importance of advocacy. A lot of people who know my personal story tell me that I am an inspiration, and I simply tell them that I am simply living my life. But I've come to realize over the course of time that I have a different way of viewing life that other people find inspiring, and they find a level of perseverance through my own personal story. So I'm curious to ask you about advocacy, and how do you think you've become a more effective advocate over the course of time, whether you're talking about awareness about cancer or survivorship? How do you define effective advocacy, and how can it help make the rest of us make meaningful differences in the lives of others? So what are your thoughts on effective advocacy, my friend?
Yeah, I think the first thing is availability, and making yourself available, and how you make yourself available, right? So if a great way of getting involved, if you're out there in the audience and you're like, hey man, I want to be an advocate for a certain issue or what have you, find out what groups there exist around those issues. For me, I kind of stumbled into it through a cancer patient support group, and like I said previously, they helped me in so many ways. In many ways, they taught me how to be a cancer patient, right? How to not look at it as an end, but to look at it as a new beginning. And, for me, that motivated me and inspired me. And, I wanted to be like them. They were role models for me.
Connect to the Wi-Fi network.
You might want to check. Sorry about that, Kevin. That's my Google Nest for some reason decided to pop in there.
No problem.
Anyways,
yeah.
with my that group, helped, I guess, show me that what I wanted to do is be a fundraiser. What I wanted to do is be an advocate for other patients. So to be an advocate, you have to be available, and then you have to follow through, right? So when you do make yourself available, I consulted for Nordstrom many years ago, and I loved one of their customer service philosophies, and that is under promise, over deliver. Right, so you have to be responsive as an advocate, and if you've promised something, you have to follow through to it. So if it's like, hey Kevin, if I can ever help you, please reach out to me. If you reach out to me seeking help, I need to follow through with it because I told you. So make yourself available, be responsive, and follow through. One of the things that catches me up a lot of times is I'll have people in the cancer community reach out to me through Instagram, but it will be under like a requested message. As opposed to my primary mailbox or my general mailbox, and I might not see it for a day or two, and I'm like, oh no, they might not think that I care about receiving their message. So I immediately apologize. I'm sorry, it was in my requested folder, and I didn't get the message in time. So be available, be responsive. And then just, be honest. There's some things that you can do and some things you can't. And, I had my stem cell transplant 7 years ago. And, I'm one of the patients I'm in communication with a lot right now is going through a stem cell transplant in Tennessee as we speak, and this guy has a lot of questions about it. But I got to say, like, I don't know your specific protocol. I can tell you what I did and what I went through. But when it comes to certain chemotherapy drugs and the like, you might have something different. So make sure you talk to your healthcare provider team and ask all your questions to that. So when you are being an advocate for whatever cause, be very honest with what you can and what you can't do. And then the things that you can do, be open to supplying those.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm going to combine my last two questions because they're interconnected. A lot of people want to write a book, get a message out, but a lot of people don't know where to start when it comes to, conceptualizing the concept of a book. So I'm curious to ask you about, for any aspiring entrepreneur or thought leader who wants to write a book, how can you position your book to maximize, the value within your subject matter expertise? And when you look back and forward through the remainder of your life, how do you want your personal and professional legacy to be defined, my friend?
Yeah, when it comes to capturing thoughts, particularly in the book, you ask an interesting question. Some people might be thinking, where do I start? And I like to give the answer, and you always start at the beginning, right? And part of the beginning is, why do you want to write a book? Have an understanding for the book. Is it to build your business? Is it to share a story? Is it to educate, to entertain? Is it to make a ton of money? What are your reasons, right? And then who are you writing the book for? And then once you kind of have that in your mind, why am I doing it? Who is it for? Then you just have to actually write, and you don't have to write a lot. I remember going to a publisher, actually it's Morgan James, my publisher, when I was going to them with my first book. And it's this book here, Immaculate, How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh. And the manuscript for this book the original manuscript was 133,000 words. And they're like, oh man, that's too long. I'm like, what do you mean it's too long? People don't buy 133,000 word books anymore. And at the time, Kevin, I there was a copy of Tolstoy's War and Peace on my desk. And I picked it up and said, this is Tolstoy, War and Peace, one of the greatest books ever written. It's over 1,000 pages long. And they're like, you're right, Ray. Classic Russian novel, one of the best books ever written, and nobody buys it anymore. And I was like, oh, maybe you have a good point. And so, they're like, how can we get your 133,000 words down? And my co-author, Tom, and I, we fought. We're like, we got a story to tell. It's 133,000 words. And we turned out and had a little compromise. Through an edit, it came down to about 131,000 words. Still, it's a pretty big book. But the reason I say that is that, your average book these days, nonfiction, it's like 60,000 words, right? So you write 500 words a day in 120 days, you've got a book. All right. So, don't think as though you don't have the time. Start at the beginning and just chip away at it. Write 500 words a day, in no time flat, you've got a book. So, those are the things, I like to tell, particularly entrepreneurs, small businesses who might be thinking about a book, ways to start it. To answer the second part of your question, legacy, man, I want to be helpful. I want to add value to others. I want to make the world a little bit better place, and I want to help other people get more satisfaction out of the world, right? So I've been able to unlock a pivot in my life since my multiple myeloma diagnosis that helps me experience joy, live with, fulfillment, satisfaction, peace of mind, and whatever little bit I can do to help others achieve those same levels. Man, that's what I'm signing up for, right? So, I like to invite the audience, Kevin. If there's ever anything that I can do for you, audience member, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me. My email address is my name at gmail.com, RayHartjen. That's also, my name is my website, rayhartjen.com. And it's also my social media handle on all my social media platforms. It's Ray Hartjen. If there's ever anything I can do for you, audience member, please feel free to reach out to me. And if you are a cancer patient and you're out there feeling alone or feeling as though you need somebody alongside with you in the fight, I'm here for you, brother and sister. Please reach out to me. It's like I said before, it's been the honor of my life engaging with cancer patients and their caregivers. It's the most rewarding thing that I do.
Well, Ray, this has certainly been a thought-provoking and well-versed conversation about resilience, overcoming obstacles, and really creating a personal and professional identity with meaning, full impact, my friend. I want to thank you for the advocacy work that you're currently engaged in and will be continuously engaged in and for engaging in conversation with me this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure, Kevin. Again, man, I appreciate what you do and the community that you build and serve. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Anytime you want to chat, my friend, give me a call.